course, your charismatic male leader always like disappoints you, right? Runs away.
Every time.
Every time.
Every
time.
Welcome to Landline, the podcast where we dive into pop culture and history. I'm Mary Mahoney, your millennial friend with too many interests and not enough friends willing to talk on the phone. On this episode, we're taking a deep dive into utopian communities. Do you ever want to leave the world and live outside society? Find yourself watching TikToks of people living in vans or in rural Alaska, or as my algorithm recently revealed to me, girlies having a convent summer, aka renting a room in a convent to take a vow of silence for the summer.
Do you want to know how bad things are? Don't worry, I'll tell you how bad things are. I booked a vow of silence at a Catholic monastery late last year, and the booking process is really straightforward. You just email the nuns and they give you some dates, but overall, they're really flexible. And I had a great time when I went. It was a lot of fun. I went to go book a reservation again at the monastery for the summer, and I just got an email from one of the nuns saying, yeah, we're actually fully booked for the next 3 months.
The deadpan delivery is incredible. I do want to know how bad things are. What's going on here? Why are people drawn to live in community outside society? What did this look like in the 19th century, and what does that look like today, specifically for nuns, or the group my algorithm wants me to join? I guess it doesn't know about my wife or the Kaler content it's also showing me. To get into all of this, I found the perfect guest to call, a historian of both utopian communities in the 19th century and of girlhood, convents, and Catholic history. My guest today is Monica Mercado. Monica is an associate professor of history affiliated with Colgate's programs in women's gender and sexuality studies and museum studies. She researches women and religion in 19th and 20th century North America and explores methods for presenting histories of women, gender, and sexuality in public history and museum spaces. As you'll hear, she's the perfect person to talk to about both 19th century utopian communities and modern connections to convent histories. We're going to chat about just a selection of historic and modern communities, including Oneida, the Shakers, and convents. All of them reimagine society by organizing their communities in ways that look different than a traditional heteronormative family, for example. The Oneida, a community based on the Christian ideals of its founder, were committed to free love and experimented with communal daycare and birth control. The Shakers, also based on Christian ideals, organized their communities in gender-segregated housing with a focus on functional design and no sex. The saying, hands to work, hearts to God, defining their ethos. The Shakers are a longtime interest of mine. I am fascinated by their design and appreciate their devotion to simplicity and functionality. Most of their communities are now museums, and they were down to 2 living members until 2025 when Sister April formally joined. News that perked my interest and inspired this episode. This is a huge topic, but by the end of this conversation, you should be able to appreciate how these groups all reimagine society, and if you could hack it in their worlds. It may leave you asking the question I pose whenever I'm at a party that feels super awkward. Should I leave? Or at the very least, how can thinking about utopian communities help us reimagine our own? Monica, I'm so excited you're here. As I just was saying to you off air, I sat down when I was going to start this show and I was like, what are my dream topics? Like, I can do anything. What do I really want to get into? And obviously I was like, utopian communities, Shakers, nuns, convents. That was really, I'm not kidding, very close to the top of my list. My wife was somewhat puzzled, but, very encouraging. But I wrote those words down and I kind of stood back and was like, who can I get who will not only not think I'm crazy, but really want to go with me down all of these rabbit holes, which I see as connected.
Totally connected.
Okay, thank you for that affirmation. I needed it.
I'm affirming this and I'm excited to have more than just my group chat. in which to link all of these things,
I
which is
mean,
no shade to my
yeah.
group chat.
No, I mean, look, group chats saves lives. Their group chats are utopian communities of their own, you might say. They have their own rules. They have their own ways of moving through society, shared enemies, shared
Mhm.
moves of affirmation, their own language, their own rules, their own etiquette. And sometimes we must exile someone from the group chat for bad behavior. I don't
Mary,
know of one.
I was just saying, I'm
What?
such an academic because I'm like,
Oh, no.
there's something there. Like, you have to
Oh,
write
thank
this.
you.
You
Okay,
can
great.
podcast about it. Somebody else
Make a
should
podcast.
talk to you about this. This is,
Okay, great. If someone's
yeah.
out there listening who studies group chats and wants to think about his utopian community, please get in touch. I mean, Monica, at the very least, we want to like get involved.
Yes.
But yes, I mean, thinking about the dark times in which we find ourselves, like not to, overstate it, but we're in hell. And so it got me thinking about people in the past and in the present who are trying to sort of make their own heaven, if you will, or a better situation somewhere else. And frankly, how do I join them? And the troubling part is most of the ones I know about are closed or over by at least 100 years. And I'm talking about the 19th century utopian movements in the US. So I would love to just take a journey with you, both through time and our own time. Like, can you tell people who have no clue what I'm talking about, like, what happened in the 19th century? What are these utopian communities?
Oh, Mary, there's so many things I want to say. And I think it's important to know that I live in upstate New York, which considers itself the sort of the
Okay.
place for 19th century utopia. So if you took like a very traditional like religion and American culture class, you would probably learn that the 19th century is this moment of like fires of like religious revival and people trying to reshape the world. And sometimes they use this term, the burned over district. And that was upstate New York. And it was just like all these people trying to figure out what to do in the middle of the Industrial Revolution and urbanization and changes to their lives. And maybe religion was the answer, or maybe different kinds of community building was the answer. And the upstate New York of this is simply that, by 1800, the Shakers are already in Albany. The Mormon, like Joseph Smith is digging for gold plates outside of Rochester. One of my favorite places, the Oneida community, is around like Utica, New York, like basically the entire New York State Thruway. I know you're not a New York person. Basically, the entire New York State Thruway is like the story of 19th century religion, and it will get you in close proximity to a lot of the utopias that you and I are interested in. Obviously, there are Shakers in other places, and I feel like I have to, you'll have to come in for like the New England of it all. But
Yes, I mean, we're not as cool in that regard. We don't have the same street cred. We don't have the same utopian community history, although we do have some. We had a Shaker community in Connecticut. We had an Oneida community in Connecticut. But, I always grew up or like learning history of this time, thinking about history of religion, which is admittedly not my area. But, I knew of Emily Dickinson attending a second Great Awakening, as I think some people call this time period, a revival in her town of Amherst, Massachusetts. And basically the minister at one point says, and if you want your soul to be saved, which was a very real concern for people, stand up. And allegedly, and this could be apocryphal, everyone stood up except Emily Dickinson. And at that moment, I was like, I've never related to a religious narrative more than this one. So that's kind of where I'm coming at this, or like that's what I knew about this moment. It was sort of like maybe how we think about evangelical, like very theatrical, like passionate preaching, like the stakes could not be higher. It's life or death. and you must get on board or get out. And it's all using the gospel as a jumping off point, but to very different ends, right?
Yes, right. I mean, depending how you think about it, the bummer might be that like Christianity is still deeply woven into so many of these utopias, along with the
right
interest, the great technology and the like big houses and the interesting gender roles. But sometimes, despite all that Christianity, right, there's weird stuff going on with gender, with relationships within these communities. I mean, to me, that's the interesting stuff, is where and how these communities like decide to live differently. Even if they're still reading the Bible to find justification for what they're doing or rewriting it, right? In some cases.
I mean, in a sense, it's like people writing fan fiction.
Yes.
Like taking,
yes,
you know, Twilight and going somewhere else with it. And, you know, not to bring 50 Shades of Grey into the chat, but in a sense, yes, because you might be someone who reads the Bible in the 19th century and see for yourself like really clearly defined gender roles, for example, or the idea that marriage is, you know, strict. There is no sex outside of marriage. Like, you know, these all might sound familiar today if you're part of different cultural traditions. But then we have like Oneida, which I know is near and dear to your heart. I want to talk about the Shakers next, which are very like I'm obsessed with. But Oneida are like not necessarily like wasn't my entry point to this history, but I know it's a passion of yours, or you're in that area, as you say, which really we should pull that audio for the New York State Cultural Tourism Board, because what an ad.
I should also assert that obviously the New York State Thruway is a mid 20th century invention, but it is, you know, there's quite a lot of history tourism that I love to do and teach. Oneida.
Let's get into it. So if you've never heard of this before, what do we need to know about it?
So the first thing you need to do is to check your silverware drawer or your mom or your grandma's silverware drawer and see if your spoons and your silverware happens to have a stamp that says Oneida, because the end point of this community, usually, I don't want to like spoil the story, but after they fail, they become one of the most successful producers of silverware in the United States until about the year 2000, 2001, 2002, when we no longer produced actual silverware for planes. A dark place to start or end. But but by saying this, I will introduce you to Oneida by saying that sometimes utopians create new ways of living that completely change ideas around marriage and gender, and yet they can still be really good capitalists. And this is maybe something we'll talk about with the Shakers and their furniture. But the Oneida community, my love for Oneida is because I live very close to the mansion that they built together in the 1840s and 50s. As a women's historian, I should say, Oneida is founded by a charismatic man. That gives me pause.
Okay, noted.
And should give you pause. A kind of, you know, a guy who starts John Humphrey Noyes in a pretty traditional vein, goes to Yale Divinity School, doesn't really like what he hears. They don't really like him. He, you know, but he goes on to be a preacher. He's in Vermont. He's married. And he starts coming up with these ideas that become his tenet of complex marriage, by which he begins to imagine a community in which everyone might be married to everyone else.
Okay.
Good way to introduce yourself to your colleagues and friends' wives. Right, again, like I don't like, this is a
that's what I heard.
Guy
it's a complicated story, but what I read about him was that he got interested in his friend's wife.
Yeah.
And he was like, hey, I know I've been like rethinking a lot of the Bible, and like long story short, one of my big, you know, takeaways is that marriage doesn't necessarily need to be between two people. And I think we should experiment here. And I don't know, just spitballing, I sleep with your wife.
Yeah.
And all
yeah.
of us are married. The four of us are married.
Yeah. John Humphrey Noyce's light bulb moment is,
Wow.
being hot for his friend's wife. That's happening in Vermont. They end up moving here to upstate New York. And people, family members, and then other people keep joining at its height. So Oneida's like, they build this mansion in the 1850s. It runs for about 20 years before things get messy. At its height, there's like 300 people living in this like 90,000 square foot mansion that you need to come visit me.
I'm so ready.
Upstate New York.
I'm not kidding.
There's even a B&B in the mansion house that runs separately from the museum. It's great. And they're building community. Like so many of these groups, they are perfectionists. They're trying to imagine a new world. I, like all utopian groups, pros and cons, like shades of gray.
Sure.
Here's the thing with Oneida. In their first decade or so, they are committed to this complex marriage plan. It is eventually, when they're all living in the same house, sort of put in action by female elders who kind of like organize who's interviewing. I realize we're not video, so
that's what
finger
just
quotes,
did air
interviewing,
quotes around interviewing. Yes.
With whom? So there are some scholars who see Oneida as a place where consent is happening. Women have to agree to the men who are propositioning them through a female elder. I think that historians of sexuality, and certainly many of my students, 21st century citizens of the world, have lots of questions about how this works in practice and how consentful this place really could be. The other thing that John Humphrey Noyce comes up with is something he calls male continence, which means that in the interview, right, John Humphrey Noyce and his friend's wife are having sex, but he's not going to ejaculate. Can I say that on a podcast? I actually don't know.
I think you just did.
All right. I think I did.
It's scientific. We'll allow it.
It's scientific.
Go for it.
There's no other way. He uses lots
happened.
of metaphors, like you're rowing the canoe towards the waterfall, or I'm probably forgetting.
Somehow that's worse. I'm sorry, but somehow that's
I should have
worse.
actually thought. I really did wake up this morning and I was like, if we're going to talk about Oneida, I should call my friend, the museum director at Oneida, and just remember how he talks about this in a less awkward way than I know I'm going to. But the point is, and the point for me as a like women's and gender historian is that this means Oneida is interesting to me because it's one of the places where women get to most of the time avoid the most dangerous thing they could do in the 19th century, which is get pregnant and give birth, right? So in some ways, Oneida is super fascinating for a women's historian, not just because marriage is complex and different, not just because everyone is sharing property in common, not just because they're experimenting with fashion. They're bloomer people. Amelia Bloomer's on the New York State Thruway too, but we can talk about her some other time.
How much is the Thruway paying you?
I'll plan
How
out
much
your
are they
whole
paying
vacation.
you? Yes.
Oneida women implement short dress, like a shorter dress in bloomers. They cut their hair a little bit shorter in a bob. But because of male continence, they're also most of the time not getting pregnant, which is a choice. As my friend Tom Geiler, the museum director there, always likes to say, there were a few happy accidents every once in a while. So there were still children around the house. But it means that women were involved in the planning and the running of the community and the labor of the community. And in the sort of like intellectual life of the community. So again, I don't want to assume, I still think there's a lot of tricky things when you're a utopian community is run
Right.
by a charismatic elder. But one of my favorite like prints in the mansion house is an image of the like mansion library, and men and women are sitting and reading at the same time. And I think you and I both know a little something about like the history of 19th century women's education. Like these kinds of like mixed spaces are super rare. And there's
Yes.
also not a lot of time to read like Harper's Weekly if you have like multiple
Right.
kids running around your ankles. I think there's a lot that women's and gender historians and historians of sexuality still need to tangle with for the history of this particular utopia. But yeah, that's Oneida in a nutshell. Complex marriage, male continence, mixed gender, kind of polyamorous community that's
Sure.
also making really popular stuff. So I started with the silverware, which is their last big product, but they're making traps, animal traps. That's how they really like make their money and build this house in the 1850s. They're also big into silk. Oneida silk is being sold across the mid 19th century. But unlike our friends the Shakers, they do begin to consider having children. And so by the 1860s, noise sort of like changes the game. No, and this is going to get messy too. So I'll very briefly say, noise, charismatic male leader. Hopefully, it seems like some women enjoyed their time in this community. Then they decide, gosh, what if we put together the most spiritual people and they have babies? So
Eugenics?
I don't know. Yeah, so I don't know if you have like a fail horn in your podcast repertoire, but
guess I need one.
Yeah, here's another place where this particular utopia is a real bummer to me, and they call it stirpiculture, but it's basically eugenics, right? What if the best people mated? And so the Oneida community begins having children in the 1860s and early 1870s. They build a children's wing. The children are community property. They're supposed to be raised communally. This is a big problem for a lot of their hormonal mothers and sometimes loving fathers. Utopias are complicated. And the thing about Oneida that really fouls things up, besides all the things I've already mentioned, is that while they're still being successful capitalists, the U.S. government by the 1870s is really focused on rooting out polygamy in the Mormon expansion and westward expansion. And John Humphrey Noyes and his associates get nervous that they're going to be sort of rooted out too. So Noyes kind of freaks out, runs off to Canada. The community's trying to decide what to do. Of course, your charismatic male leader always like disappoints you, right? Runs away.
Every time.
Every time. Every time. But maybe the wildest thing for the place that I still live, and I live about like half an hour from Oneida, New York, is that the community breaks up. People decide how they're going to live together. So some parents and children reunite and move across the street or stay in the original mansion house. But lots of people had children with the same community partners, which meant there's a glut of single moms, for example, who, their child's father has already partnered off with somebody else and they've moved out.
Oh, wow.
Many of these descendants are still in the same town and in the area. When I moved here in 2016, Noise real estate signs on my drive to my new house really surprised me. It's a common name, and you start to learn the common names of these community members because they're on the street signs, and I've met lots of them, and some of them still live in the house. The house has apartments and a hotel as well as a museum.
What? what?
I know. I've gone on way too long
No,
about
but
this.
I love that. I mean, I think for people listening, this is really interesting because, one, you may not have known about this utopian community or the idea that there were these utopian experiments in the 19th century. But I think when some people think about history wrongly, they think it's always a story of, like, air quotes, progress, that we're always discovering like better ways of doing things or organizing society. And then we adopt those things and things change and there's progress. And yet, like, listening to you describe Oneida, I'm hearing that there's experiments in, if not gender equality, at least like reimagined gender roles, like men and women reading in the same space, like reimagined marriage, like at least without the strict, mostly for women, ideas of chastity, which are really confining, which we still have in our world today. Like thinking about how far apart our modern day trad wife iconography or that idea is from what you just described in Oneida, I don't think, I think people would be surprised to hear that that was well over 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And largely was abandoned because, as you say, the leader of this community will fail you every time. And he certainly did. And people panicked. But it's like there was communal childcare. Like that's another thing that people are still wanting today.
Absolutely.
And thinking about how can society run if in a way that's equitable to parents, if women are saddled with childcare and like all of these questions. Like that's why utopian communities are so interesting to me is like they're grappling with the questions we're still dealing with.
Yeah.
And they failed a lot of the time. Like
They failed a lot.
Eugenics,
their choices. Yeah.
no one's ever going to co-sign that. That was wrong. To be clear, that was wrong. And, like issues of consent and like all of these like very real concerns with what they did. And it's like they were kind of demonstrating that you can radically rethink things that we accept as, a given or a common way of living as a society.
Yeah. I mean, I think, to say like my and maybe our obsession with these kinds of places is really about just like, thinking about these groups of people who tried to like reorient their relationship to the world and each other. It's fun. I spend a lot of time bringing students to this place and I teach there and build exhibitions there. And introducing people to Oneida is a wild ride, and certainly for my friends and colleagues who do the education program there every day of the week. It is but at its core, and I think this is probably true of our shared interest in the Shakers and maybe some other communities, I feel like all my creative writing friends talk about like world building, and I always try to steal. It sounds way more interesting than anything historians have come up with, like as a term to talk about this, like to think about, how you build a world and how you build a world during the various trash fires that seem to have existed in tandem with the times in which we live.
I mean, and a lot of times it seems like, and let's get into the Shakers, my faves. These groups are offering what feels like a refuge from in the 19th century and today. A commonality is when industrialization is coming in, when people are really freaked out by, having to move to cities, which are growing and evolving with all these technologies like railroads, factory work, all of these things that are like making the way you experience, daylight, like instead of working until the sun goes down, like you're working all night because they're developing technology to make you do that. Like time is collapsing with railroads. You can travel places more quickly. There's industrial pollution. There's all of the like noise pollution, all of these things that are changing your sensory experience of everyday life. And then it becomes even more attractive to have folks who are like, and we will not be buying into any of that. We're going to go over here and we're going to live on our own. I don't even think they consider themselves part of the United States, Shakers. Like they're their own place. And by the way, their leader is a woman. Get into that. And you sent me a shared thing that I didn't know we both appreciated, which is a prose poem by Eileen Myles called I Am Ann Lee. Maybe as a way into the Shakers, like what is going on with Eileen Myles, a queer person who is like basically standing Anne Lee in this like really, really evocative autobiographical prose poem.
Yeah, I love this poem. I learned about it not long after meeting Eileen Miles at near Shaker sites in Western Massachusetts, and she calls all of it out in this poem, which I hope you'll share with your listeners.
I
right?
absolutely will.
Just, right?
I have a quote I would love to share, part of my favorite part, where she actually talks about the Shakers. Anne Lee thought that she was the church. Get it? An edifice. And that is a radical thought, not being cast as a thing. The live woman expanding out. Jesus was the church and she was the church. She was the second coming, and now God was complete, being both woman and man. It's so important that she had those 4 miscarriages and never proved to lay an egg correctly, and convinced her blacksmith husband to not lay eggs with her. People chuckle when you say Shakers when you remind them that they were celibate. How did they reproduce? Well, they adopted. They recruited. Foundlings! Exclamation point.
This is it. Now again, I don't want to, charismatic female leaders are complicated too.
They will also disappoint you.
They will also disappoint you. But you, me, Eileen Miles, like we're all seeing.
We're onto something.
I don't know, something in the Shakers about, how you survive, how you persevere. Of course, again, given what I do, my interest in Anne Lee and this like constant problem of pregnancy and miscarriage in early and 19th century America, not to mention 20th and 21st century America, right? She doesn't have, she isn't able to build a family in the way that women of her time are. And what she does do is build this community that we're still talking about in 2025. I love when in that poem she talks about like making other things, right?
Yes.
Making things and making them well, which of course, like the Shaker people have such a complicated relationship with things, right? Shakers are people, and they're also known for all the beautiful things that they made and that still inspire, 21st century notions of good minimalist design, right? But they persist because of those things just as much and perhaps even more than because of their ideas. And certainly they persist through those things because, as we all know, they didn't reproduce, right? So,
yes. I mean, Eileen says, I won't survive, as Anne, I won't survive, but my church will, my work. And thinking about being a woman, being a queer person, like being all these different things, like people can read themselves into Shaker history or their community because you can think about the ways that you can reproduce yourself, not biologically. So like through your cultural production, through your artistic production, making chairs, if that's your situation. Just a bit of trivia, and I don't have a footnote for this, but I believe that this is true. Monica, I'm testing this out on you. If you know the source, tell me. I once read or heard or somehow absorbed that the person who owns the largest or one of the largest private collections of Shaker furniture is Oprah Winfrey.
Mary, I want this to be true so badly, but I have absolutely
I can't fact
no
check
idea.
That.
And I'm going, I go to a lot of Shaker gallery shows, which, let's be clear, the Shakers are the most chic utopia. No offense to my friends at
no
Oneida.
offense to them.
No offense
the
to
Shakers
the Amana
make the
washing
most
machines. But
well, the Shakers are in a cut above. I'm just going to say I will offend these other communities if you won't. The Shaker furniture, their style is so beautiful. It's so striking. It's simple. It's efficient, but it's beautiful.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go to these next. There's the next Shaker exhibition. There's a big one in Philly in the winter, and I'm gonna look I'm going to look at those.
Okay, thank
those
you.
labels.
The closest I've come, and this is the breadcrumbs I'm going to leave you with that I need you to just pick up and run with. And again, you haven't asked for this task, but
No, but I want it.
I got really deep into reading Maine antique catalogs because there were, I don't know if there still are, sellers who specialized in Shaker furniture and goods.
Yeah.
And basically one year somebody brought Oprah and was like, hey girl, let me put you on to the Shakers, which is honestly, everyone needs a friend like that in their life. And she ended up buying some furniture for, I think, her farm, which she then owned in Indiana.
Oh,
and that's where the trail goes cold for me. And so I have been looking this up. There was a Black art collector who helped Black celebrities in the 80s and 90s build and curate collections of primarily Black American art, but also for some reason Shaker work. I mean, it could just be like, as we've said, it's amazing. But I'm very intrigued about what Oprah values about the Shakers and the ways in which Oprah's world is a utopian community with its own problematic, charismatic leader. But that's a topic for another day. That is a topic for another
time. It might end up being a multi-episode podcast. We may need to revisit.
We'll have you back, Monica. We're gonna have to. We'll come back. I mean people let us know.
I know that you're a Maine Shaker girly, but I do want to say that I grew up in Albany, New York, which is where Mother Ann Lee lived for a lot of time. Her sort of the home and the Shaker Heritage Society still preserves this property right across the street from Albany International Airport. So if you're ever flying through, but I was going to say is that we actually, I mean, why this connection is so interesting to me, and maybe no one else, so maybe you cut this, is that we think there were a few Black Shakers, and there are some really incredible artists and musicians who have been like playing with the idea of like the Black Shaker and abolitionism in New York. And I've been super interested in sort of seeing how Shaker history keeps kind of growing beyond the main story of the last year or so in Shaker history that I imagine we're about to get to.
We're about to dive into that. That's really interesting. I'm going to have to follow that. You're going to have to keep me posted on that because, you know, something to think about, folks who are listening to this, is with utopian communities, part of what's intriguing is to see the ways in which people allegedly leave the world to make these new spaces where they can, you know, start from scratch, do anything they want. And yet, of course, we're all people and our biases come with us into these communities. And the degree to which we allow them, or say the Shakers allow them to come in or not, or call them out and do things differently, is really interesting. And race is one of those areas, I think, because they're really focused on equality. You know, so they want parity between the sexes. The TLDR of Shakers is, you know, what most people know is that they had a vow of celibacy, like they were not supposed to have sex, which then invites a lot of questions about how they would continue if they're not reproducing. They did, you know, even when also like the Oneida group, they leave society, but they don't leave capitalism. They have to produce goods to survive. They make furniture. They become confused with the goods they make to the point that a Shaker who lived at, I believe, Hancock said, "I am not a chair." Iconic line. I want a poster that says, "I am not a chair." Like, I'm obsessed with her. Yeah. And that's my favorite Shaker community that I've been to so far. So I'll just say that.
Oh, Hancock Shakerville. I mean, let me just tell you that, you know, you introduced me at the beginning, but I like to think that I bring a lot of credibility to this topic because Hancock Shaker Village is one of the first historic sites I remember my mom taking my sister and I to. My mom was crafty. So, you know, like Shakers, obviously. Yes. Yeah, and we went to Hancock Shaker Village and, you know, I mean, we might talk about Catholics later. I feel like a lot of Catholic women of a certain age told me they dressed up for Halloween once as a nun. I've never dressed up as a nun, but I have been dressed up as a Shaker because at some point in the early 90s, Hancock Shaker Village had Shaker dresses that you could put on And so I
Oh my
have,
God.
I really need to find it to send to you, but I have a picture of my mother, my little sister, and I in like dark colored white bonnet shaker outfits. My first and only historical cosplay. Well,
I
actually,
am
that's,
obsessed with
yeah,
this.
yeah, that's not true. I should say my other shaker cred is that when I moved here to upstate New York, Utopia land, in
Wow.
2016, I participated in the first and still only endurance reading of Mother Ann Lee's 1816 testimonies at a immersive sound festival in a reclaimed industrial factory in Hudson, New York. So if that is not both evidence of how shakers remain so chic, right?
But also, I was just going to say, like, is there a more hipster sentence that's ever been uttered? Said with respect for you.
Yeah,
But I'm
no,
just
I
saying,
tried to add some
like,
really good adjectives there.
no, it's incredible.
It's
And,
probably the most hipster thing I've ever
I love
done.
this.
And I did, in fact, drag my mother to this. And my part didn't go on until maybe 9 or 10 o'clock at night. But I just,
I love
in case anyone listening was like, wow, this woman is telling us this weird story about this place, Oneida, New York, we've never heard of. And now she's trying to talk to Mary about the Shakers. I just want to like, I really want to press
These are your
on
bona fides.
my-
This is so serious. Like, these credentials are so serious. I don't even know how to speak right now. And I feel foolish because before we started recording,
I forgot to mention
I
them.
wasn't, you never mentioned this, which honestly should have been, like, this should be like on your email signature for
I didn't
everyone
want
to
scare
know.
anyone. Yeah.
Well, I told you that, I mean, I had a friend, one of my best friends from college who's from Maine, which if you know anyone from Maine, it's a huge part of their personality to let you know that they're from Maine. And I say that with love and respect to Kara and everyone out there from Maine. However, I was like, look, I've heard a lot about Maine from you through the years. You've never offered to take me to Sabbath Day Lake, where the last living Shakers lived. There were, at that time, 2 living Shakers. And this was probably 2017 that I went there. Mm-hmm. And I saw Brother Arnold, one of the last 2. I saw him trimming a hedge on the tour because he doesn't do tours anymore, but he's like there, obviously just living his life. And I couldn't speak. I was like, oh my God, he was 5 feet away from me. And I was like, is this what it is to be starstruck? Because celebrities don't really do that to me, candidly. And I'm not disparaging them, but it just doesn't have that effect on me. Brother Arnold, I was like,
I'm like keep drawing in breaths, which I feel like is not appropriate for an audio medium.
My God.
But it really is stunning to me that you got to see him, and you got to see him before his New York Times moment last year of really being the face of the last 2
Shakers
before there were 3.
And let's get into that. So, like, again, we said their values are chastity, but also, you know, the communal living. They live in separate gendered housing, you know, dormitories on these different settlements. They make furniture. They would make medicines, food goods, all kinds of manufactured things that they made, brooms that were then sold to support their communities. The communities then, some of them became museums as members died off. They did try to prolong their community by taking in orphans, which again, to your point about Oneida, not a positive moment. Yeah. You know, at one of their museums, I learned that they had a dad sign away the parental rights to his children when he was going off to fight in the Civil War for the Union. He was not literate, so he made an X on a piece of paper that they told him just said, you will get your this just says we care for your children while you're off fighting for the United States. They were not obliged to fight as pacifists. When he came back, he learned that he had signed away his parental rights. All children adopted by the Shakers had to live in the community until 18, and then they had the option to leave. But regardless, you know, as you can probably agree, not the best moment. But so their numbers have been in decline, like a lot of religious communities. Then again, I'm out on parental leave. I had my son over the summer. My phone blows up one day. in the
Mine
spring,
too.
or whatever day this was. And I was like, I'm losing my mind. Am I this sleep deprived? This can't be right. And it was basically like new shaker, like many alerts because they got a new member at Sabbath Day Lake. We're up to 3.
We are up to 3. And I was going back, Brother Arnold and Sister June, who's in her late 80s, the 2 remaining Shakers, are subject to this beautiful profile in the New York Times last year in 2024. And I reread that recently and I was like, was there a hint that there was going to be a 3rd? There was not a really solid hint there that there was going to be a new Shaker.
I feel like they knew at that point. So I'm like, why were they holding that back
from us? They
right.
were holding it back from the
why
two
were they
of
telling us?
Obviously, the history, the art, and the craftsmanship of the Shakers, all of this is fascinating to me. But because I also, because what I'm actually most of the time paid to do is write about Catholics. I am really interested in religious communities in decline that then see, for Shakers, 1 added to 2 is a surge in membership. In
Huge.
Sister April is 59. She has lots of time left on this earth, and she comes from a sort of Episcopal convent where she was kind of seeking and exploring, and now has been welcomed in. And actually, much like Catholic sisters, she is now kind of a novice Shaker. And Brother Arnold and Sister June, right? They get to kind of evaluate her in a year and decide, right, if she is the right one, if they're gonna accept her fully into their tiny community. It's fascinating to me, and more so than a lot of communities, right? The Shakers obviously have a lot of fans like us, but they also have literal capital F friends, right? The people who keep this going, who support them, who come, right? This sort of volunteer group in Maine that, sometimes worships with them. So she's obviously meeting people. I am fascinated, but maybe not surprised that in 2025, someone might look at their life and say, right, I want to join and build anew with community that does this. Would I have said that a few years ago? I don't know. But Sister April, come on the podcast.
Sister April, please write the pod. We want to talk to you. It's an emergency. But I do find that fascinating as well. I think part of the reason why I'm so fascinated by the Shakers is, one, aesthetically, their work is beautiful. That's the most vain reason. But also I'm fascinated by people in community who want to make the world a better place. As earnest as that sounds, that's always been fascinating to me since I was a child. And I told you off air, I started Catholic school in 4th grade. I joined and almost immediately was like, oh, I want to be a nun because you get to live with your friends and help people. That's what I thought it was. And the same is true of Shakers. I think they said in the New York Times piece that 1 to 2 people contact Brother Arnold a week about potentially joining the community, which is crazy. But also, if you think about capitalism has existed from the 19th century forward. That's always part of the conversation that has alienated people from themselves, from their families, from everything. So of course, things that bring us back to community might seem appealing. And I wonder what you make of this moment when Sister April is okay, this, Brother Arnold in the New York Times piece, I love that he's basically it's our job to make the community open, to keep it open and to be ready. Because as Mother Ann said, she built for capacity. She made them build these huge dorms when they didn't have that many members. And then a bunch of members showed up. And Brother Arnold is basically, I'm expecting the same thing to happen here. And then he gets Sister April. So, what do we do with this?
Yeah, this is the question. What do we do? And I think we've already hit on this like persistent like appeal of living in community. I think, and this, I don't know, now I'm like, are Shakers and Catholic sisters more overlapping than I thought? There's like an interest in intergenerational community that I think unites these places in interesting ways and seems to always come up in these profiles of the Shakers and the people who are their neighbors and who like support them, who come to their services. And there's always some line when I read a Shakers profile about, yeah, these like friends of the Shakers. This is true, I think, of women sort of approaching Catholic convents too. Like they're interested, but they're just not ready to make the leap and divest themselves of so much of the world. But here, there still are these examples in this day and age of people who are not just drawn to these places, but commit themselves to this reinvention, to a vocation, to, in the Shakers' case, one that involves a little bit too of sort of like labor and quiet contemplation, right? It's not quite a cloister. I don't want to take any Catholic comparisons too far, but remaking personal relationships in this setting is just, it's super interesting to me. I mean, again, Sister April, I want to know more. I mean, I think that we don't know personally motivations, but I think a lot about friends and people I know who are really thinking about like what's the next way they're going to live, whether or not they are anticipating eventually being empty nesters, whether they are like me, a solid spinster who loves my privacy and living alone, but also loves being in community, like in the ways that, I don't know, it's probably going too far to say, like, what do I read about? I read about, right, people our age taking care of parents while also having children, like while also building friendships, and then a vast number of thought pieces about how there are so many Americans who are not finding satisfying community. You know, I don't think joining the Shakers is the answer, but I think, you know, I used to think about the 19th century and all the seekers I was studying, but seekers are not... Seekers are eternal. There's seekers in every era. But I think there's just a lot of seeking right now. And it sounds like Sister April was seeking and pursuing, right, this kind of like Protestant version of sort of women's community. And then she found her way to Maine. I have so many questions, Mary, but I also think at its root are just these words that at this point I've overused on this podcast, but just like community and thinking about building a life that looks different.
Yeah, and I think the pursuit of that has a lot of overlap. Communities that are overlapping that you don't think are going to overlap. Right. like when you think about people choosing these alternative ways of living that have intergenerational community living or like shared labor, reimagined gender roles, you know, all of these different things, the groups we've talked about so far and will continue to are all religious for the most part, but they also overlap in their concerns or their desire to reimagine society with the queer community, with like the idea of chosen family, like fictive kin, like imagining people in relationship to you in ways that are not specifically biological, but that are deeply felt and real. You know, so there's all these like overlaps that I think people would be surprised to like see connections of, but there are so many think pieces lately that are about male loneliness and the male loneliness epidemic, which I have to be candid, I don't have a lot of sympathy for, because I'm like, wow, even with like loneliness gets to be like gendered in a way that discriminates against women. Like, I'm sorry, what? And, I'm not discounting that there are men who are lonely and that that's a real problem. Like, my thoughts and prayers, like, in a sincere way to those people. And at the same time, like, you can see the ways that women are dealing with that in ways that also carry so much pressure to, as you said before, like, take care of aging parents and children and maintain all of these different parts of life that not necessarily fall on men in the same ways. And, society asks a lot more of women. And like, how do these different off ramps or like alternative paths in society offer something different? And I do think that's why the choice of like women in these alternative societies or utopian communities are really interesting. Like, as we step into like present choices, and kind of bringing Sister April into conversation with sisters that I'm more familiar with. So we've been talking about utopian communities that haven't existed for a while or in very small numbers, or almost as like a punchline, frankly, the Shakers, even though they're not a punchline to me. To me, they were the basis of a Dear America book that I was obsessed with, and that's how I first learned about them. But that's another story for another day. But, a lot of your work has been about girls, like girlhood, Catholic women, convent culture, nuns. And basically, in anticipation of today, you sent me some great stories about, young women who are entering convents today and kind of like what's going on with that. How is the motivation for them today different than maybe some of the 19th century women that you're studying?
This is the question. And again, here's where I retreat into but I can't answer these questions. I am but a historian of 19th century American Catholic girls and women. And that makes me want to say that sometimes I think the motivation isn't changing at all. That I think that many joiners and young women who have been interviewed and profiled, kind of more than a lot of other Catholics in the last couple of years, still talk about, a prayerful life, a joy and freedom in their relationship to their God, joy and freedom and mission and having a calling, and for women who join an active order, who minister and create, whose vocation is out in the world in those ways. But I've also been as a historian who goes to archives at convents and conferences with sisters and nuns, I've also met and seen many young contemplative and cloistered women. I would be a bad shaker and a bad nun because I'm bad at being quiet. But I think a number.
I feel you.
It would be a problem for us. But that there has been interest in those communities too. I mean, of course, we can't overlook politically that some new orders like the Sisters for Life, who take a particularly like anti-choice, right, orientation to the world, are also seeing some growth there. Of course, a newer order. And so I think that's obviously politically satisfying for the young women who are joining their ranks. But I am struck with sometimes how not different at all the motivations are. And then I lay over my assumptions again of like what community might mean to someone in their 20s and 30s right now and where they're looking for it. I'll admit that deep COVID, one of my secret habits when Twitter was still had not completely entered the depths, is that there were a lot of young nuns on Twitter, young sisters or young women who were novices preparing for the sisterhood. And those who were going to take their vows in 2020, early 2021, would like live stream their ceremony. Wow. So this is so you might end up cutting this too. But I'm not embarrassed 5 years later to admit that one of my like folding laundry Saturday afternoon pastimes alone in my house during COVID was just out of complete curiosity watching some of these some of these ceremonies. And again, it reminded me of that some things seem to be consistent, sort of like joy and desire for mission. Some of the things we talked about with the Shakers, intergenerational living, finding community. The thing that I think is most interesting, and perhaps why I've never wanted to be a nun, and until very recently couldn't have been, is that, in order to be a Catholic sister or a nun, to divest yourself of the world, you have to divest yourself of property. That's not a problem for me. I'm a renter. But you can't have debt. You can't have student loans, and that has been such a sort of intriguing issue to me, that in fact there are now, small groups supporting Catholic sisters who are promising to pay off the student loan debt of women who want to join the Catholic sisterhood. I don't think this is a huge trend, but it's one that I just can't help being fascinated by as someone whose loans were recently forgiven, right? To think about what qualifies you in this day and age and what holds you back. It's fascinating, and again, it's complicated. I know some women who have recently joined Catholic orders who have said, like, I don't want to be the last one either, right? This is a great question. When we get Shaker Sister April, I don't know why I'm saying we, when you get Shaker Sister April on the pod, this is a question for her too, because I do think, since the 1960s, Catholic sisters have been in decline. The numbers are clear, right? The decline is huge. 70%, I think, of American Catholic sisters are over the age of 70 right now. The last time those numbers were crunched in the early 2020s. So it's also a choice, because building is slow and hard, and it's never going to be like the sisterhoods in which they're their sister role models and colleagues lived in or grew up in. Did that take a dark turn? I don't know.
No.
Student loans and aging. I don't know.
No, but I mean, I think it's interesting because on the one hand, you could sort of say, as someone who's not an expert in it, anecdotally, like, okay, I can imagine how before the 20th century, even mid-20th century, being a nun would seem attractive if you wanted to unabashedly be ambitious in certain careers.
Absolutely.
Or be professional in a setting where it's not unusual, or you would be treated with respect. I understand how that would be attractive then. I think what's interesting now is, like, you can do that. If you're a woman, you can do that without becoming a nun. It's socially acceptable to do that. And also, as you say, it's even harder to divest yourself of debt when, like all these communities we're talking about can't leave capitalism behind. And like really no greater example than the Catholic Church, which both has incredible wealth, but also requires these women to pay off these debts before they can join. Yeah. And so that's really interesting to me too. And then to your point about like not wanting to be the last one, like if you're joining because you're dealing with loneliness in your own experience, or you want this personal relationship with God, kind of the contradiction for people who aren't Catholic is that nuns are brides of Christ, but Catholicism is not pro polyamory. So that's another whole piece.
Sure is, Mary. I mean, I think there's so much to be said about this, and then it's not quite the same aesthetic, but I do think, right, the sort of visual of the young sister or the young nun, right, is, I don't know, it's slowly infiltrating my algorithms, along with puppies and pottery projects. But I think that, somebody texts me at least like once a month with, sister, young nuns sisters, like social media sisters. Like if you're looking for them, they're there, right? And
Yeah.
they are fascinating PR for the cause of Catholic sisterhoods. Funny enough, what usually comes up on my social media are actually old nuns, mostly because I've spent a lot of the last couple of summers and falls doing convent road trips to do research in convent archives. And so I've met lots of dynamic older women who have welcomed me into their convents. And by luck of the draw, we have similar politics. And they are fighting the good fight. You know, the Sisters of Charity of New York, whose archive I've spent quite a lot of time in, have been out. No King's Day, like every protest. They are making signs. They have incredible signs. They're using old media to show it. They are Facebookers to the core.
Aww,
they are not on
somebody,
but actually no, maybe somebody doesn't need to get them on TikTok or even Instagram. But I think every time someone tells me about young nuns or nun media, I'm like, but the old nuns are doing it too. They're just like in the places that none of us look anymore.
Yes.
And so it does remind me of some of the good nuns who I've met along the way, who again are even in their retirement, seeing their vocation as one that is still like mission driven, to help the communities that they live with and around. And that is certainly not true of a lot of the sisters and young nuns we could be talking about. But I think I think that, you know, again, we could talk about this for hours and hours, but I have to invite you for a utopia / convent summer vacation
Wow.
itinerary planning. I would
not
say that's
when
my
I say
new.
it's my dream.
I'm glad it's your dream. It can't be my business because you might be my only customer, but I'm here.
I'll leave you great reviews.
I'm here.
That's something you can count on. I guess as a final point, I so appreciate your time and sharing all of your, willing to go down all these rabbit holes with me about all of these things that I love. Thinking about, you know, we've been talking about these utopian communities as people who leave the world to reimagine it. And are kind of, and I'm one of these people who maybe are kind of making them a spectacle through my interest, and, you know, hopefully taking them seriously at the same time on their terms. What can they teach us that we can bring back into the world? Like, what ultimately do they leave us with, even if it's questions?
Oh, Mary, you're saving the best and biggest question for last. I just can't help thinking about how, like, reimagining how you live is like a very active endeavor, and that it's not something that most of these communities have someone or someones who were writing and thinking a lot of the day, right? But you also just have to, like, do it. Like, you have to, like, put it into practice. And I think about that a lot when I move back and forth between, you know, thinking about the state of the world and what I am doing in the various, you know, sort of communities that I'm a part of to make it and me better. So as much as I think we think of the Three Shakers as off in their place, or I think of Oneidans in their mansion, or sisters cloistered in the convent. Like, that doesn't just happen overnight, and it doesn't just happen as a sort of theoretical exercise. I think that to me is something that I think about. How do you actually build a community, not just imagine one, and maintain one and theorize one?
So what you're saying is it's not easy.
I'm saying it's not easy.
Wow.
And what I really just want to do is research Oprah's auction history and
We
install
need
shaker
it.
pegs in my mudroom and take
Yeah.
another historical road trip. But it's not easy. And
It's not
it's
easy.
complicated.
I mean, some of us have a 3-month-old, and now we just want to take off to Oneida and go on the New York freeway or what have you and go on your tour. But I believe it will make it happen, and I believe we can make it happen. And I'm being serious. If we want to do a mini series on Oprah as Oprah's World as a Utopian Community on the Patreon, I'll do it, and I'll bring you back. I mean, we'll get into all of it. The book club, the Angel Network, I don't even know. It's too much. There's too much with Oprah, but I'm ready to go there because I so love thinking about utopian communities. And I've loved thinking about them with you. This has been so incredible. Thank you for indulging me.
Of course. Thank you for indulging me.
This is like my favorite kind of conversation to have. So, obviously I would join the shakers of all of these, but, I'd love to hear from folks about what their favorite utopian communities, not necessarily in terms of like I'm endorsing their ideas, because as we've said, there is no perfect utopian community, but the ones that fascinate you the most, let us know. And if you have questions, maybe I can bug Monica for answers later and we'll get back to you. But yeah, this has been so great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you so much, Monica, for this great conversation. If you have questions for Monica, DM me at Mimi Mahoney on Instagram or message me on my show page on Patreon. Just look for Landline by Mary Mahoney. You can even request the Oprah's Utopian Community episode. I'll ask her questions, we'll record some answers, and I'll share them there. My Patreon is like my own personal utopian community, so I really hope you'll join me there. It's completely free to join. I know they all say that, but it's a place where we can connect. You can sign up for my weekly newsletter on pop culture and history. Paid members get bonus episodes every month, along with access to chat rooms to talk all things pop culture and history, and my weekly newsletter of links and recommendations. If you like the show, please rate and review it wherever you listen, and tell a friend to help people find the show. Thanks so much for listening. I'm going to hang up now, but I'll call again soon.